The night she whispered it, Marcus Webb had been sitting on his porch steps for 40 minutes in the dark, and he hadn't even noticed the cold. It was the kind of November evening that arrives in Charlotte, North Carolina with a particular honesty, not brutal yet, but clear and sharp enough that the air had an edge to it, the kind that finds the places where you're not quite buttoned up and reminds you they're there. He was in a flannel shirt and no jacket, coffee gone cold in his hands, staring at the middle distance between his front steps and the oak tree at the edge of the yard that his son had named Gerald for reasons that had made complete sense to a 6-year-old and had never been fully explained to anyone else. Gerald the oak tree had lost most of his leaves now. He stood bare and patient in the dark like something that had decided, long ago, that seasons were not a problem but simply a condition of being alive. Marcus had been trying to arrive at the same conclusion about his own life for the better part of 3 years. He was 41. He was a middle school history teacher at Jefferson Academy, a job he loved with the specific devotion of a person who has found the thing they were meant to do and holds it carefully because they understand its value. He had a son named Caleb who was 9 and who had recently become, without explanation or transition, deeply interested in the migratory patterns of monarch butterflies, and who left library books on the subject in every room of the house like a trail of very specific breadcrumbs. He had a mortgage that required him to think about it but not panic about it, which he decided was the honest definition of financial stability for a single father in his tax bracket. He had a sister in Raleigh who called every Sunday and a best friend named Derek who showed up with beer and opinions whenever Marcus needed either. What he did not have, what he had been sitting in the cold thinking about without quite thinking about it, was any clear sense of what came next. Not for Caleb, who was fine and luminous and would become whoever he was going to become with or without Marcus's anxiety about it. But for Marcus himself, for the version of him that existed after 9 o'clock when Caleb was in bed and the house was quiet and the question of what a person was building toward, in the second half of his life, had room to get loud. He had not found a satisfying answer. He sat on the porch steps instead, in a flannel shirt, holding cold coffee, thinking about Gerald the oak tree. He had lived next door to Diane Okafor for 14 months and knew her the way you know someone whose life runs parallel to yours at close range, by accumulation, by the small repeated evidence of who a person is when they're not performing for anyone. He knew she left for work before 6 and returned after 7. Usually with a bag over each shoulder and the particular posture of someone whose body has been carrying decisions all day. He knew she ordered the same Thai food every Friday and always tipped more than 20% because he'd once helped her carry groceries and seen the receipt she'd left in the bag. He knew she had a sister who visited twice a year and laughed so similarly to Diane that the first time Marcus heard it from across the fence he'd thought for a moment he was imagining things. He knew she was the CEO of a healthcare technology company called Lumen Health. This was not a secret, it was in the Charlotte Business Journal, twice, and that she carried this fact with a quietness that he found, the more he observed it, genuinely remarkable. She did not perform her success. She did not perform anything, actually. She was, in her interactions with him over 14 months of porch waves and driveway conversations and one notable occasion when Caleb's butterfly book had blown into her yard during a windstorm and she had returned it with a note inside about monarch migration that was more detailed than anything in the book itself, simply exactly who she appeared to be. He had thought about her more than was strictly compatible with the careful emotional accounting he'd been doing since his marriage ended. He had been honest with himself about this and had chosen, because he was a cautious man who had learned that some choices needed to be made deliberately and not just allowed to happen, to maintain the neighborly warmth they'd established and leave it at its appropriate dimensions. This was the plan. He was committed to the plan. The plan had not accounted for her coming outside at 10:45 on a November night and sitting down beside him on the porch steps uninvited, which is what she did. She was in a coat, which suggested she'd seen him from her window and made a considered decision about the cold, which suggested she'd been watching, which Marcus filed away in a part of his mind he wasn't ready to look at directly. She didn't explain herself. She sat down beside him with the ease of someone who has decided a thing and is simply proceeding with it, and for a moment neither of them said anything, and the silence was comfortable in the specific way that silences are comfortable only between people who have been in each other's orbits long enough for quiet to feel natural. "You've been out here a while," she said. "Thinking," he said. "About." He considered giving her the abbreviated version. He gave her the real one instead, because it was late and cold and something about her sitting down beside him on his porch steps without being asked had moved the evening into a register where brevity felt dishonest. He talked about Caleb, about how good he was, how strange and tender and specific, how the Monarch Butterfly books were just the latest chapter in a sustained and passionate engagement with the world that Marcus found both extraordinary and humbling. He talked about teaching, about a student that week who had looked at a primary source document from the Reconstruction era and asked a question so precise and unexpected that Marcus had spent the rest of the day thinking about it. He talked, finally, about the quieter thing, the porch steps question, the second half of life question, the sense of a person who is doing well and is grateful for it and still has this persistent, low-frequency feeling that something is waiting to be figured out. Diane listened the way she did everything, completely, without performance. She looked at Gerald the oak tree while he talked, as though the conversation was easier with somewhere neutral to rest her eyes. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Can I tell you something?" "Yes," he said. She turned and looked at him directly, and the porch light caught her face in a way that made the moment feel, to Marcus, like something being recorded. Like one of those instants the memory decides to keep in higher resolution than the ones around it. And she whispered it, not because she was being theatrical, but because what she was about to say was true, and quiet things that are true sometimes require a quieter register, the way you lower your voice in a room where something important happened. "You're the reason I come home," she said. "Not you specifically, every night. But, knowing you're there. Knowing Caleb is there. The light in your kitchen at 7 in the morning when you're making his lunch. The way you coach his soccer team even after a full week of teaching and you're obviously exhausted but you show up anyway." She paused. "I have a driver and a company account and more square footage than I need, and I have spent 14 months being more certain that I am exactly where I am supposed to be than I have felt in any apartment or any city or any version of my life I've built anywhere else." She stopped. "That's you. That's your house. That's the light in your kitchen." Marcus Webb sat very still. He was a history teacher. He understood the weight of moments. He knew that some of them arrived dressed as ordinary evenings, cold porches, bare oak trees, cold coffee, and turned out to be the ones everything after organized itself around. "Diane," he said. "I know," she said. "I know it's a lot. I'm not asking for anything. I just couldn't let another night go by without you knowing that." He looked at Gerald the oak tree. At the amber streetlight at the end of the yard. At the woman sitting beside him on his porch steps who had just handed him, without ceremony and without condition, the most honest thing anyone had said to him in 3 years. "Caleb wants to show someone the Monarch Butterfly route," he said finally. "The full migration map. He's been waiting for the right person to show it to. He's very selective." She looked at him. "Saturday," he said. "If you're not busy." She was quiet for a moment, and then she smiled. The real one, the one he'd seen maybe 4 times in 14 months, the one that was nothing like her professional composure and everything like who she actually was. "I'll bring breakfast," she said. She stood. She went back inside. The light in her living room came on and then, after a while, went off. Marcus sat on the porch a while longer, in the cold he had finally started to feel, and thought that the second half of his life had perhaps just quietly, without announcement, decided to begin. Gerald the oak tree stood bare and patient in the dark. He seemed, Marcus thought, entirely unsurprised.